Hello, everyone. Dr. Philip Travis here, and this week in American History, Part 1. We are going to read about and examine. I also have my video lecture, as always, so please see the video lecture on this subject as well. But we're going to be looking at the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War is a highly significant development in American history, in world history as well. The 7 Years' War, you see here, fought 1756 to 1763. This conflict in the United States, or in North America, it's oftentimes remembered as the French and Indian War, as it's a war that was fought between the British and the French, the British and its colonial subjects, the French its colonial subjects, and both sides had alliances with native peoples in the conflict, like the Algonquin or the Huron Native Americans. And so it came to be known as the French and Indian War in North America, though this conflict is, in a lot of respects, you could argue it's the first global war, because, of course, this is coming at a time where we're witnessing the rise to the height of Western European imperialism. And so you have, of course, global imperial powers here, with territories ranging from India to the Caribbean to Asia, and so on. So it really is, it's a global war in many respects. The biggest theaters of conflict really occur, however, in Europe and in North America. In Europe, the war started, to a large degree at least, between a dispute between Austria and Prussia. Now, Prussia might not know that name because Prussia doesn't exist anymore, but Prussia was a kingdom, a militaristic kingdom. A lot of the early sort of military training and drill master work came from folks like the Prussians. In fact, it was a Prussian, Baron von Steuben, who we'll learn about during the American Revolution, who is to a large degree responsible for drilling and organizing George Washington's Continental Army during the American Revolution. But the Prussians, this is a northern European sort of kingdom, and its areas would have extended from its capital, if you will, Berlin. And Berlin, of course, becomes the capital of Germany. And that has much to do with the fact that Prussia is the kingdom that is probably the most significant, definitely the most significant in the formation of the nation of modern Germany. So its domains, areas of Prussia would extend from areas of northern Germany, areas around Berlin, and territories up into portions of what are today Poland, and into areas of the Baltic states, like Latvia, Estonia, the area of Kaliningrad, which is a part of Russia today, which is just north of Poland, would have been sort of the heart of East Prussia, as it was called at the time. But there was a dispute because Prussia had taken an area, the area of Silesia, from Austria. And so the war in Europe breaks out largely over these disputes. And it really becomes a global sort of competition between colonial powers in some respects, and imperial powers in respects. In Europe, of course, you have the Prussians and the Austrians fighting each other over control and areas in Central Europe. But on a larger scale, you witness the French and the British really fighting for global colonial dominance. And the French were aligned with the Spanish and aligned with the Austrians, whereas the British were aligned with the Prussians very closely, as well as other powers. In a lot of respects, this war really carries far-reaching ramifications for the history of Western Europe. On the one hand, it's the first of two conflicts that helped to lead to the bankruptcy of France, which, of course, we know was a contributing factor, a major contributing factor in the development of the French Revolution. The French incurred massive debts from the 7 Years' War, and they lost a great deal of territory. And, of course, the French became involved in the American Revolution, sort of a continuance of their efforts to compete with and weaken the strength of the British Empire in their participation in the American Revolution. From a standpoint of economics, these two wars were really significant in helping to contribute to the financial crisis that France would find itself in by the end of the 1780s. For the British, the 7 Years' War, and the Americans, I should say, the 7 Years' War was very significant as well. First of all, the French also, it should be noted, spent a lot more interest and focus and effort on the conflict on the continent. The British tended to focus on the conflict on the high seas and in North America more than on the continent, where they certainly provided supplies and funds to the Prussians, but allowed the Prussians to do most of the fighting there. The 7 Years' War began as a territorial dispute. In fact, it was claims by Virginia families to areas of what is today western Pennsylvania and Ohio. George Washington, when he was young, was actually given a authorization from the governor of Virginia to go to these areas that Virginians had claimed near Fort Duquesne. This is modern-day Pittsburgh, by the way. And Washington was to go there and effectively tell them, hey, this is Virginia land. And this is part of the French, sort of the far-flung French Empire in North America, which was really built down the St. Lawrence Seaway. Okay, this is the sort of main artery, if you will, of the French Empire in North America. Well, if anybody knows the story, George Washington was not so nicely said, "This is not your land." He was pursued by the French, built Fort Necessity in the ensuing battle near Fort Duquesne with the French. Washington hardly escaped with his life in that skirmish. But it started over a territorial dispute for the Ohio River Valley areas and western Pennsylvania. And particularly this fort here at modern-day Pittsburgh, Fort Duquesne, became the centerpiece of the beginning of the conflict in North America. Well, as the conflict plays out, it's actually a huge win for the British and for their for the British American colonists. Here is a famous painting from 1771 depicting the death of General James Wolfe. Well, General James Wolfe died in the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, which is outside of the city of Quebec, right here. And he died in the battle, but his army, the British, this is the British, General Wolfe, they won that battle here in the heart of the French Empire in Quebec. And so despite, much like, as you'll learn studying British history during this time period, much like Horatio Nelson dying in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, when his navy defeated the French and the Spanish, much in the same way, General James Wolfe dies in this battle against the French. But his army, like Horatio Nelson's navy, was triumphant. The ramifications of this were massive, because in the aftermath of this, in the Treaty of Paris, the British receive effectively all of the French North American colonies, with the exception of Florida, Florida and Louisiana. I should say the French territories east of the Mississippi. Louisiana would go to Spain, and then it would come back to France, which allowed Napoleon later to sell it to Thomas Jefferson. But after the 7 Years' War, effectively France lost all of its North American territories. It lost everything in Canada to the British. It lost everything in what is today the United States to the east of the Mississippi River to the British. Now, one would say this should have been why does this lead to the American Revolution? It led to the American Revolution to a large degree because it was also very expensive for the British. More so for the French because of, in one hand, how they were fighting on the continent, but on the other hand, the fact that they lost so much territory. And France was an absolute monarchy, and they did not have the sort of lending and investment enterprise, private enterprises that the British had per se. But nonetheless, it was very, very expensive on the British. And the conflict was caused to a large degree, at least in North America, because of British colonialists moving westward. There's more colonists. The colonies now have gone up to some 2.5 million people, and people are looking for land, and they're moving west, and every time they move west, they're in a conflict with Native Americans or with the French at that time. And then you had to send over the British Navy and British soldiers, and you had to pay for all of this to fight all of this. And so the colonies were becoming very expensive, and the 7 Years' War was very, very expensive. And as a result of that, effectively the colonists were kind of blamed by the British for the war, and the British took sort of regulatory actions against the colonists to ensure that the colonists sort of behaved and made the crown money, if you will. And so as a result of the 7 Years' War, the British would implement the Proclamation Line of 1763, which effectively, if you were to take a line, you were to find the Adirondack Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. The Adirondacks are part of the Appalachian chain, but the Appalachian Mountains, which runs all the way down from the north, all the way down to Georgia. The Appalachian Mountain chain becomes really the Proclamation Line of 1763, and effectively the British government said no colonists may go beyond that. That was a huge issue because the war started from the colonist perspective largely because of land largely beyond that. But they said, now you can't go out there because you're going to fight with Native Americans and it's going to cost us money. They started enforcing import duties. They began to in place a number of taxes like the sugar tax, the Stamp Act, the townshend duties, all in the 1760s when Prime Minister Grenville was in charge in Great Britain. And so this conflict, which was a great victory, masterminded by William Pitt, who directed the British to focus on these major strong points on the St. Lawrence Seaway, allows the British to win this crushing victory. But the ramifications were for this policies that would be enacted by the British because of the cost of the war, effectively, that would eventually create significant tensions in the colonies as colonists are looking for land, they're looking for ways to be profitable, and the British were now increasingly restricting this. And this begins to sow the grumblings and the seeds that eventually will lead to the American Revolution occurring in the following decade, in the 1770s. So this week, just summarize what you think are the most interesting elements of this video. And I'll see everyone this week in the discussion forum. Take a listen to the lecture for this week, of course. And let me know if you have any questions. Just summarize this. I'm going to place this video right in with the discussion board, so you'll have the extra credit discussion board for those of you in my class. You'll have the extra credit discussion board, and you'll have the video right there. So just make the post below it. I hope everyone enjoys these videos, and let me know if you have any questions.